Okay, welcome back. We're still on page 417 talking about IT financial management. In addition to having good tracking data so you could bill your customers, it also provides an opportunity for the managers to go and say, look, here's how we need to spend our money. We need to, I need to go in and invest in another router or another, network connection or, what the rest of those things. So it's good information for how to identify areas for additional investment, things that require money. Okay, now we're going to talk about high availability, which is probably about half of the chapter. This is a good topic. There's an awful lot of good stuff in here. So, background information. Most businesses are 24/7 now. I mean, in the old days, you had a Sears and Roebuck, store in the middle of town someplace, and they were probably open, 8 or 9 hours or maybe 10 hours a day, and that was it. Now everybody is open 24/7. So, in the old days, I could pick a time, for example, to shut down the servers and do maintenance, right? I could say, well, 11 o'clock at night, I'll just go ahead and, shut these guys down. I'll do some maintenance. Maybe I'll do my backups at like 1 o'clock in the morning when nobody's around. And those days are kind of gone. In a global environment with a website that's selling products all over the globe, there is no good time to do maintenance because you're up at all times. Okay, that's kind of the whole point. So high availability has to handle both the scheduled stuff I just talked about. I have to have scheduled maintenance. And then all the unscheduled stuff. Fires and floods and civil unrest and, tornadoes and power outages and terrorist attacks and viruses. All those things that are unplanned. So they talk about the characteristics of high availability. They talk about reliability, okay, recoverability. Is that a made-up word? So my products and services are reliable. They don't typically fail. And then if they did fail, I have to have some way of recovering them. Error detection, I want to be able to instantly detect there's a problem and maybe do something about it. And then continuous operation, where if I discover an error, I can switch over to another part that is not faulting. I mentioned to you guys the 5 nines, right? So here's a table that basically explains it all. So if I told you I want my website available 99% of the time, that's still 4 days of downtime. 5 nines, which 99.999 is about 5 minutes, and typically that's about as good as it gets. You tell them you want 5 nines high availability. They know exactly what you're talking about. And of course, the bill is going to go up a lot. I mean, if you pick 95 versus 5 nines, yeah, your bill is probably going to about double. Because this means something. This means an awful lot. This means I have to have a lot of redundant features. I have to have redundant cabling in case somebody cuts a cable. I need to have redundant, routers and redundant, servers and redundant everything. So essentially it's double. Whatever the cost estimate for that was, double it. And that's what it'll take to get to 5 nines. Okay. So to start with, when you're planning on doing a high availability, particularly way out here in the stratosphere, the 5-9 area, okay, when you're out that far, you really need to be making some decisions on where to apply that type of, because it's so expensive, where to apply that. So the first step is determining where high availability should be applied. I mean, do you really apply high availability to everything? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe you need to go in and figure it out. So they have this thing called the business impact analysis. That's one technique you can use. And so what you basically do is you look at all of the pieces and say, how critical is my my customer-facing website? Most likely it's going to be very important, and you're probably going to have to ask for, 5 nines or somewhere in that area for that guy. So the problem is, if you're hosting this with a company, they're not going to know what it is you're doing. I mean, they see a website, but is this your customer-facing website where your shopping cart is, right? Or Is this a website that you trade information with your vendors? So if it's an internal website where vendors are providing you, discounts and stuff, I might be able to get away with 99.9 for those guys. Because, hell, if it's down for 9 hours or a couple of days, it's no big deal. So how the heck is a hosting company going to know? Well, they're not. You're going to have to tell them. You're going to have to go through this analysis and figure out which is the high availability parts and which are not. Okay, cool. They talked about, the example they give is a very good example. Let's say, for example, you have a human resources department, and they have their own computers, right? So we're talking in-house now, not necessarily a hosting company. So you have an in-house HR, and you're trying to determine whether or not you want to have how much high availability you have on this. Well, it kind of sort of depends. I mean, if you're a consulting firm or ad agency, one of those guys, temp agencies, well then, yeah, your HR is probably very, very important. But if it's Amazon, no. So again, how the heck would anyone else know? I mean, you're going to have to talk to them to find out what is important. Now, if this was front-facing, website, well, Amazon, oh boy, I want 5 nines or better. But HR, so it really just depends on the company, right? Okay. So business impact analysis, you need to go through and say, this impacts the business a lot, this impacts the business a little bit. Just go through the list and figure it all out. Another way of looking at it is the cost for downtime. What's the dollar amount per hour? And again, if this was a forward-facing, customer website for Amazon, that could be, millions of dollars an hour. But if it's, mom and pop's shoe repair, well, maybe not. So, you need to come up with, what is the cost per hour, the impact. So basically there's 3 tiers that they generally talk about when they talk about high availability. Tier 1 is the highest level. That's where this is mission critical stuff. This is like the 5 nines. And it would have the maximum impact on the business and hurt you the most financially. So that's tier 1. You're going to spend a lot of money on tier 1. Tier 2 would be things like your supply chain connection. Again, it's not my forward-facing customer. Maybe an internal website that I use with my suppliers. That'd be a great tier 2. Yeah, it's important. And yeah, I don't want to go on for days on end of not having that operational, but it ain't that bad. And then internal systems. I mean, if it's depending on your company, it could be if your HR went down, or maybe your development people couldn't get to their server, or maybe the QA people couldn't get to their server. And yes, it would be bad, but if they had other things to do for a couple of days, that'd be okay. So again, tier 1 being the highest with the most impact, tier 3 being the least impact to your business as far as money and all the kind of other things. Okay, so we've talked in the abstract about high availability. And so let's assume that you're going to pick one of these guys. I'm going to do 5 nines. Great. Well, what are you going to have to buy to make that happen? So that's a kind of a big business. So they start with the architectures. So on page 420, they talk about high availability architecture. And once again, it's always about redundancy. That's the whole point. So here's an example of 2 ways you can do this. One of the choices is what's called an active system. I have a server over here and a server over here, and when client requests come in, they both go to each. If one of them failed, well, then the other one just picks up the slack. So the only thing would happen is that it would get slower, right? Instead of handling, things very fast, it would just slow down, but you'd still be able to do everything. The other is called an active passive. Active passive has a standby server sitting over here. Now, it's not currently running, but if something happens over here, it, bam, switches over to the new guy. And so now you get to maintain the same speed and performance that you had before. Okay, now, this is kind of weird. Let's just say that I have a node of 4 servers, and it costs me, I don't know, $200,000. And then I go over here and I have another node that costs me an identical $200,000. Am I going to spend $200,000 and just have it sitting there, not doing anything? That seems a little weird to me. It's like you bought all this money and it's turned off? What the hell? So most people go with active because you spent the money, you might as well use it, right? So most people try to go with active. Now, this is a very simple example just using node clusters, but it's a lot more complex than that. I mean, for example, I have a data center and I have an underground fiber optic cable. I don't want to have one point coming out of my building because some poor guy with a backhoe is going to end up cutting that cable one day. So I need a cable coming out the other end of the building. I need redundancy for cabling. I need redundancy for network service. I probably will contract my, network service with 2 different companies. And so if one of them freaks out or goes out or has a denial of service or whatever, so I have 2 cables, 2 internet service providers, 2 servers, 2 switches, 2 routers, 2 everything. So it's not just this example here of these nodes. We're talking about essentially doubling the budget, 2 of everything to be able to pull this guy off. Okay, so dual systems with both of them active, that's the active. Dual systems with one of them passive. And the active-passive, what some people do, now I will tell you the reason why this is kind of sort of popular. That is, okay, it's time for you to replace your servers because they're getting kind of old, right? And so you go buy some brand new server and you take the old one and make it the standby guy, the failover guy. So you're running on brand new hardware 99% of the time, but when something goes wrong, it'll switch over to the old software. I mean, the old hardware. That's what a lot of people do because they don't want to spend money to have brand new failover, but having last year's failover system kind of makes sense, right? Okay, cool. But failover is just like emergency generators. I don't run my business on a gas-fired generator. I use commercial lines because it's cheaper, it's better. And I only switch over on a failover when there's an event. Well, that's what this is. It's just switching over to the other guys. And admittedly, the other guys could be, a couple years old servers, and so maybe your quality is not quite so bad. So my original discussion was, well, if you had a failover cluster, you wouldn't lose any performance. Well, yeah, that's only if you spend money foolishly. If you spend money wisely, most likely the second node is not going to be quite as powerful as the first. Okay, so they talk about robust hardware. When you buy hardware, you can buy hardware that's specifically designed for high availability. They talk about fault-tolerant servers. So I go buy me a server that's designed to fit into a 19-inch rack, and it's got 2 power supplies and 2 power cords coming out, and it's got 2 sets of fans, and it has 2 of everything. It's got 2 CPUs and 2 sets of RAM and 2 sets of hard drives and a whole scenario of how to maintain multiple hard drives in a redundant array. And all these things cost money. So when you buy a server, you could buy a high availability server, and it is going to come with multiple power supplies and multiple fans. And I mention power supplies and fans and hard drives because most of the time the failures are on things that have moving parts. Okay, fans, hard drives, those things tend to fail. Other parts are a lot more resilient just because of their very nature. But things that have moving parts, yeah, things that get affected by lightning strikes like power supplies, yeah, you're probably going to need to double up on those guys. Do I really need to double up on CPUs or RAM? Maybe not. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.